She gave her last plate of food to a crippled beggar. And what happened next changed her life forever. Why would a poor girl with nothing choose to feed a man everyone else avoided? And who exactly was this mysterious man in a wheelchair? This is not just a story about poverty and wealth. It's about the unseen power of kindness, the miracles that unfold when we give without expecting anything in return, and how one selfless act can unlock a future beyond imagination. If you've ever doubted whether small good deeds still matter in today's world, this story will move you deeply. So sit back and journey with us into the life of Esther, a humble roadside food vendor whose quiet compassion turned her into the owner of a five-star restaurant, a community leader, and a symbol of grace. Because sometimes the person you lift up may be the one sent to lift you higher. What if the poorest person on your street turned out to have the richest heart? Stay with this story, because it's going to change how you see kindness forever. Esther was only 24 years old, but her eyes carried the quiet weight of someone who had seen more than her share of hardship. She lived alone in a tiny, dimly lit room behind a row of shops in Lagos. There was no electricity, no running water, and certainly no luxuries. The floor was rough, the walls were cracked, and at night, the buzzing of mosquitoes kept her company. Her parents had died when she was still a child, and since then, she had been on her own. But despite her life of lack, Esther's spirit burned bright with something rare, relentless compassion. Each morning, long before the sun climbed over the roofs of the city, Esther rose to prepare food to sell. Her small wooden food stall stood under a big tree by the roadside, held together by old planks and rusted iron sheets. The sign above it was faded, and the benches were worn from years of customers. Still, she kept the place clean, neat, and filled with the warm smells of rice, beans, and yam porridge. Her slippers were falling apart, and her dress was patched at the elbows. But her smile, it was always brand new. Esther treated every customer with the same quiet respect, no matter how rich or poor they looked. "Good afternoon, sir. You're welcome," she would say in a gentle voice, bowing her head slightly. Tiredness lived in her bones, but kindness ruled her actions. For her, courtesy wasn't a mask. It was a habit built from empathy. People in the neighborhood often wondered why Esther seemed so cheerful despite her situation. One day her friend Mama Titi asked, "Esther, why are you always smiling when you struggle like the rest of us?" Esther wiped her bench, smiled softly, and replied, "Because crying won't bring food to my pot." The answer was simple, but it stayed with those who heard it. She wasn't denying her reality. She was choosing to rise above it. But what truly set Esther apart wasn't just her strength. It was how freely she gave, even when she had almost nothing left. If someone came to her stall without money, she didn't send them away. She'd find a small portion and serve it with a smile. "Eat first," she'd say. "We'll talk later." She believed that hunger didn't wait for wallets to be full. She didn't give for show. In fact, most of the people who benefited from her generosity never even thanked her properly. And yet, day after day, she kept feeding stomachs and warming hearts. Esther didn't see her food as a product. She saw it as a chance to give someone a better moment in a difficult day. What Esther didn't know was that someone was watching. Someone who didn't just see her small wooden stall or her faded dress, but her huge heart. A man who seemed like just another beggar in the crowd. And while everyone else ignored him, Esther gave, not once, but every day. With no expectation, no strings, just grace. Her story hadn't even begun yet, but her character was already shining like gold beneath the dust of poverty. She was the kind of person the world often overlooks. Poor, quiet, ordinary. But inside she carried the kind of wealth money could never buy. And this is where everything begins, because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness unlock the biggest twists in fate. Sometimes, the way you treat a stranger when no one's watching becomes the key to a door you didn't even know existed. What if the man everyone laughed at turned out to be the one who held your future in his hands? This next part of Esther's story will leave you speechless and inspired. Every afternoon, when the sun baked the dusty streets of Lagos and the air shimmered with heat, something unusual happened near Esther's wooden food stall. From the far corner of the road, a faint creaking sound would echo toward her. Creak, 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 followed by the slow approach of an old, rusted wheelchair. It was pushed by a man everyone called a beggar, a cripple, a nobody. His name, or at least the name Esther gave him, was Papa J. Papa J didn't speak much. He never shouted, never stretched out his hand like the other beggars did. His legs were wrapped in yellowing bandages, and his clothes were torn beyond repair. His face was often smudged with dust, and his eyes carried a tired, almost haunted look. Most people avoided him. Some laughed, others covered their noses or crossed the street. "That dirty man again," a boy once said with a sneer. But Esther didn't laugh. She didn't walk away. She didn't ask him to move or complain that his presence might scare off customers. Instead, she made room for him, every day. One afternoon, Papa J arrived, looking even weaker than usual. Esther had only one plate of food left, a mix of beans and yam porridge she had cooked early that morning. It was supposed to be her dinner. Her stomach grumbled as she looked at the plate, but she looked at Papa J and said softly, "You didn't eat yesterday." Papa J didn't raise his eyes. "I was too weak to come," he whispered. "I haven't eaten in 2 days." Esther didn't hesitate. She lifted the plate and placed it gently in front of him. "Here, eat," she said. He looked at the food, then at her, eyes glassy with unshed tears. "You're giving me your last plate again?" he asked. Esther nodded with a small smile. "I can always cook again when I get home." The way he held the spoon, with trembling hands, said everything. He didn't cry, but the silence between them was louder than words. As he ate slowly, Esther sat nearby, cleaning her counter. A few passers-by watched the scene, whispering or shaking their heads. One woman even asked her, "Why do you always feed that beggar?" Esther paused, then answered, "If I were the one sitting in that wheelchair, wouldn't I want someone to help me too?" That one sentence held more humanity than the entire street combined. Papa J came every day. Not once did he ask for food, but every day Esther brought him a plate anyway. Hot rice, spicy beans, yam porridge. Some days, she added a little meat when she could afford it. And always, she gave it with a smile. He never spoke much. He just sat there in his tilted, squeaky wheelchair, facing the side of her stall, head bowed. But something about his quiet presence brought a strange peace. Esther never expected anything in return. She never asked about his past. To her, he wasn't a burden. He was just someone who needed a little kindness, and that was enough. What Esther didn't realize was that these small acts of giving were slowly weaving the fabric of something much larger. In a world where people only give when they're watched, only help when there's something to gain, Esther stood apart. She wasn't rich, but her heart was. She wasn't powerful, but her actions carried weight. And without knowing it, she was being watched. Not by the people laughing at Papa J, but by the very man sitting in that chair. Because Papa J wasn't who everyone thought he was, and soon, everything was about to change. He came every day without fail. Then one morning, he vanished without a trace. What happened to Papa J? Stay with this chapter. The mystery is just beginning. Esther's days followed a quiet rhythm. Wake before dawn, cook the meals, clean the bench, smile at customers, and wait for Papa J to appear like clockwork. It didn't matter if it rained or if the sun burned too hot. Papa J always showed up, his rusty wheelchair groaning beneath him, his face low, his presence silent but familiar. For Esther, his arrival was no longer unusual. It was expected. It had become part of her daily heartbeat. So when the fourth morning came, and his creaky wheels didn't echo down the street, something inside her began to shift. At first, she brushed it off. "Maybe he's late," she whispered, setting out her food trays. She looked up the road every few minutes. Nothing. A few hours passed. Still, no sign of the man who always sat quietly by her stall. By noon, she wasn't just worried. She was scared. Esther left her pot for the first time in weeks and walked to the edge of the street. She peered in both directions, eyes scanning for that familiar hunched figure in the broken chair. She turned to Mama Titi, who was arranging vegetables nearby. "Auntie, did you see Papa J today?" she asked. Mama Titi laughed carelessly. "That old beggar? Maybe he crawled off to another corner. You know he doesn't have legs." But Esther didn't laugh. Something wasn't right. The street felt too quiet, too incomplete. She asked the sachet water boys, the bike man, even a child passing by. None of them had seen him. Some shrugged. One muttered, "Maybe he's gone for good." That thought hit Esther like a cold gust of wind. Gone? Without goodbye? Without his usual nod, his tired eyes, or even a spoonful of rice? She sat by her food pot, barely touching her own meal. Her customers came and went, but her heart wasn't in it. She stared at the empty spot beside her stall, the place where Papa J's wheelchair always stood, tilted slightly to the left, like a broken promise. Her eyes didn't leave that space for the rest of the day. By the second day, she couldn't smile anymore. Her voice grew softer, her hands slower. Even the delicious scent of her jollof rice couldn't lift her spirits. The pain in her chest was unexpected and unfamiliar. How could someone she barely knew leave such a hole in her life? On the third night, Esther sat alone in her tiny room. The only light came from the moon outside her cracked window. She held the old plate she used to serve Papa J. Her fingers traced its edge. "He never missed a day," she whispered. "Even when he was sick. Even when it rained." She closed her eyes as a tear escaped. It wasn't just sadness. It was the ache of not knowing. Where was he? Was he hurt? Dead? Taken? Forgotten? By the fourth morning, her heart was a tangled knot of worry and fear. Then, something unexpected happened. A tall man in an expensive outfit stepped out of a shiny black car in front of her stall. He said nothing, just handed her a brown envelope and walked away. When she opened it, her hands trembled. A message, just a few words. "Come to Green Hill Hotel by 4 p.m. Don't tell anyone. From a friend." Esther's breath caught in her throat. A hotel? A secret note? From who? Her mind raced, but somewhere in her heart she already knew. This wasn't a coincidence. This had everything to do with Papa J. And whatever was waiting at that hotel was going to change her life forever. She thought he was just a beggar. But the truth was bigger than anything she could have imagined. What Esther found behind the hotel door will shock you and move you to tears. At exactly 3:30 p.m., Esther stood outside her tiny wooden shop, staring at the padlock in her hand. Her heart thudded so loudly she could almost hear it in her ears. She took one deep breath, then turned the key slowly until it clicked. This wasn't just any other day. Everything inside her screamed it. Tucked under her arm was a brown envelope, the same one she had received earlier from a strange, well-dressed man who had emerged from a black car, handed it to her without a word, and vanished just as quickly. Inside the envelope, only one thing. A single white paper that read, "Come to Green Hill Hotel by 4 p.m. Don't tell anyone. From a friend." Esther had never been to a hotel before. She had never even stepped inside a building that tall. But something about that message, something about the word friend, stirred her to move. She hailed a tricycle and clutched the envelope tightly all the way through the busy Lagos streets. Her fingers were cold with fear, but her spirit was burning with questions. When she arrived at the hotel, her breath caught in her throat. The building stood tall, its glass windows gleaming like mirrors under the cloudy sky. The doors were big, golden, and intimidating. Two guards stood by the entrance. One stepped forward when he saw her. "Good afternoon, madam. Who are you here to see?" he asked. Esther swallowed, then held out the letter. I was told to come here. My name is Esther." The guard read the letter, then smiled as if everything made perfect sense. "Ah, Esther. Someone is waiting for you inside." Just then, a man in a black suit appeared and nodded politely. "Please come with me," he said. Esther followed him through a long, quiet hallway lined with soft carpets and shining lights. Her footsteps felt too loud. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. At the end of the hallway, the man stopped beside a tall brown door. He turned and said simply, "He's inside. You're safe." Esther hesitated, then pushed the door open slowly. What she saw made her freeze. There, in the middle of a grand room, sat Papa J. Only this wasn't the Papa J she knew. This man's hair was neat. His skin was fresh and clean. He wore a crisp white shirt with gold buttons, and a shiny watch glinted on his wrist. His wheelchair was sleek, polished, and nothing like the broken frame he used to push beside her stall. But it was him. The eyes, though brighter, were the same. "Papa J?" she whispered, her voice cracking. He smiled softly. "Come in, Esther." She stepped forward, unable to believe what she was seeing. "My name is not Papa J," he said gently. "It's Chief George." Esther blinked. "Chief?" she repeated. "I'm a billionaire," he continued. "I own several companies, and I've spent my life building schools, hospitals, and businesses. But I got tired of people only helping others when they think someone is watching. So every year, I go out as a beggar to see who still gives from the heart." Esther's lips quivered. "I didn't help you because I wanted anything," she said softly. "I just thought it was right." Chief George nodded. "Exactly why I chose you." Then, something even more shocking happened. He stood up. Esther gasped. You can walk?" "Yes," he said calmly. "I just wanted to see who would still care when I looked broken." Tears filled her eyes. She could hardly breathe. The man she had fed with her last plate of food, the one everyone had mocked, was a billionaire in disguise. And now he had chosen her. What came next would not just change her day, it would change her entire destiny. What if the person you helped in silence turned around and gave you the world? Esther's reward wasn't just money. It was something far more powerful. Don't miss what happens next. Esther could barely process what she was seeing. The man she had once fed with her last plate of beans and yam, the man the world called a crippled beggar, had just stood up from his wheelchair, tall, strong, composed. "My name is Chief George," he had said, his voice steady, his eyes full of truth. A billionaire. A man who had watched her, tested her, and now revealed everything. Still seated across from him, Esther's hands trembled in her lap. Her voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "Why me?" Chief George gave a small smile. "Because you gave when no one else would. You gave with no audience, no reward, and no reason other than kindness. I needed to find someone like you." He stood up fully now and looked at her with a warmth that softened the entire room. "Come with me," he said, offering his hand. "There's something I want to show you." Esther followed him into the hallway, still in a daze. Two men in black suits were already waiting outside the door. They nodded respectfully at Chief George and began walking behind them. The hotel felt grander now, larger than life. The marble floors sparkled and the silence felt holy. When they reached the front entrance, Esther's eyes widened in disbelief. Outside, 5 enormous black SUVs were parked in a line. Their windows gleamed and their engines hummed quietly. Big men in dark suits stood by each one, like characters out of a movie. Esther froze. Chief George turned to her and smiled. "Get in." She entered the first car, her heart pounding in her chest. What was happening? Where were they going? The convoy rolled out of the hotel like royalty passing through the streets of Lagos. Esther sat beside Chief George in silence, clutching the brown envelope in her lap, like it might still wake her from this dream. 30 minutes later, the cars turned into a quiet, beautiful road. The buildings here were nothing like what Esther knew. Tall, modern, spotless. As they pulled up to one of the most majestic buildings she had ever seen, her mouth dropped open. The structure before her looked like a palace disguised as a restaurant. It had massive glass windows, white marble walls, and gold handles on the doors. Flowers lined the entrance. A glowing signboard above the door read, "Esther's Place, Home of Sweet Meals." Her knees weakened. Chief George stepped out of the SUV and walked around to her side. "Go ahead," he said, pointing to the door. "It's yours." Esther stared at the sign again, her voice barely escaping. "Mine," she whispered. He nodded and handed her a shiny set of keys. "You fed me with love when you had almost nothing. Now I want the world to come eat at your table." With trembling fingers, she unlocked the front doors and stepped inside. The sight took her breath away. The floors shone like glass. The chairs were velvet soft, the tables elegantly set, and the ceiling sparkled with star-like lights. The air smelled of new beginnings. In the back was a large, fully equipped kitchen, stocked with modern gas cookers, industrial refrigerators, stainless steel counters, and uniforms for chefs and waiters. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She turned slowly to Chief George, eyes wide with disbelief. "You did all this? For me?" He nodded, stepping beside her. "Kindness is a rare treasure, Esther, and when we find it, we invest in it." Esther dropped to her knees, overwhelmed. Her hands covered her face as happy tears poured freely. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Chief George replied gently. "Your actions already did." That day, Esther's life changed forever. But the truth is, it wasn't luck that brought her here. It was the power of kindness, pure, silent, and unforgettable. It's easy to stay kind when you're poor, but what happens when money, power, and respect are suddenly at your feet? Esther's next chapter proves that true character never changes, no matter how high you rise. The sign outside now read, "Esther's Place, Home of Sweet Meals," and people from all over Lagos came just to get a taste. The restaurant stood tall and proud, with floor-to-ceiling glass windows and golden handles that sparkled under the sun. Inside, the scent of freshly grilled chicken, spicy jollof rice, and fried plantains danced through the air like a promise. Music played gently in the background. White-coated chefs moved like artists in the kitchen. Waiters in crisp uniforms served meals with a smile. Everything about this place screamed success, class, and comfort. But the woman behind it all? Still the same Esther. Gone were the patched dresses and worn-out slippers. Now she wore graceful clothes and elegant shoes. But her smile, that soft, genuine smile, hadn't changed a bit. Upstairs, in a glass-walled office that overlooked the entire restaurant, Esther sat at a desk with her nameplate engraved in gold. A portrait of her hung behind her chair, and the staff referred to her as Madam Esther. But she never let it go to her head. She was still the first to greet the janitors, still the last to leave when the day ended. Some customers who remembered her old roadside stall would stop and stare, their mouths open in awe. Was this really the same girl who once served them food from a wooden bench under a tree? Yes, it was. And though her circumstances had changed dramatically, Esther made sure her heart didn't. She never forgot Papa J, or rather, Chief George, the man whose quiet test had flipped her world upside down. She never forgot how it all began, with one plate of beans and yam given out of nothing but compassion. She knew she had been blessed for a reason, not to live in luxury, but to make a difference. So while others saw a fancy restaurant, Esther saw a mission. She didn't just want to serve good food, she wanted to serve goodness. And that's exactly what she did. Each week, Esther's white food van, labeled Esther's Food Love, Feeding the Hungry, rolled out into the streets of Lagos. It stopped under bridges, at crowded bus stops, and near market alleys where children begged for coins and old men sat forgotten. The van wasn't there to sell, it was there to give. Inside were warm, home-cooked meals prepared by her kitchen staff: rice, soup, yams, and fruit, neatly packed and handed out with a smile. Esther didn't just send workers, she came herself. She looked into the eyes of each person she served and said softly, "Eat well. You are not forgotten." One day a young staff member asked her, "Madam, with all this success, why do you still come to the streets?" Esther smiled gently, touched her chest, and replied, "Because kindness brought me here, so I must keep sending kindness out." And just like that, the cycle continued. From one heart to another, from one act of compassion to the next. Esther had money now. She had comfort, respect, even fame. But she never let go of the values that once carried her through hunger, loneliness, and loss. She didn't just build a business, she built a legacy of love. And every time she looked out the window of her restaurant, down at the people entering with hungry stomachs and leaving with full hearts, she thought of one man in a broken wheelchair, and how everything started with a plate of food, a quiet decision, and a simple act of grace. She started with nothing but a plate of food and a pure heart. Now, her name feeds hundreds, and her story feeds souls. Stick around, because what Esther does next will restore your faith in humanity. Every Saturday morning, long before the sun fully rose, a white van with bold red letters rolled out of the parking lot of Esther's place. On its side, painted in bright colors, were the words, "Esther's Food Love, Feeding the Hungry." And true to that promise, this van didn't stop at wealthy neighborhoods or event venues. It didn't sell anything. It served the forgotten, the ignored, the ones society stepped over. And leading it all was Esther. She no longer wore aprons or patched clothes. She no longer bent over smoky pots to stir yam porridge in the heat of the day. Now she wore graceful, clean dresses and soft leather shoes. She rode in black SUVs, sat in meetings with city leaders, and owned one of the most popular restaurants in Lagos. But every time the van rolled out, she climbed in like a volunteer, not a boss. Because she knew, a good heart doesn't retire. Each week, they stopped under bridges where homeless men slept on cardboard sheets. They visited busy roundabouts where barefoot children begged motorists for change. They went to abandoned buildings where widows sat huddled with empty bowls. And each time, Esther stepped down from the van with trays of warm food, rice, stew, fruits, and bottles of water. Her team would sometimes ask, "Madam, are you sure you want to come here yourself?" And every time, she gave the same answer. Yes. Because kindness isn't something you send, it's something you bring. People lined up with wide eyes and open hands. Some were old men with sun-beaten skin. Others were little girls holding babies on their backs. They didn't know Esther's story. They just knew her as the woman who smiled as she served, who looked them in the eye and said softly, "Eat well. You matter." And that was enough. Back at her restaurant, her staff handled everything with professional grace. 5-star chefs, well-dressed waiters, an administrative team that knew her schedule down to the minute. But they all understood. This wasn't just a business, it was a mission. Esther had become a symbol. People from other cities visited Esther's place, not only for the food, but to meet the woman who turned one act of kindness into an empire of compassion. News reporters asked her about success. Entrepreneurs wanted to know her secret. Young girls wrote her letters, calling her a role model. But if you asked Esther herself, she would tell you the same thing every time. It all started with a plate of food and a broken man in a wheelchair. That man, Chief George, never disappeared from her memory. She credited him for everything, but deep inside, she knew the real credit belonged to her own quiet choice to care. When no one else was watching, when no one else believed, she had given without expectation, and life had given back more than she could imagine. Now, with every van she sent out, every hand she fed, and every tear she wiped with a warm meal, she was passing it forward, proving to the world that kindness is never wasted. One morning, as the food van returned from another round of giving, a young volunteer turned to her and asked, "Madam Esther, why do you still do this? You've already given so much." Esther looked out the window at the busy streets, her voice quiet but steady. "Because someone saw me when I was invisible. Now, it's my turn to see others." And with that, she stepped out of the van, walked toward another hungry crowd, and smiled. The same smile she wore back when she had nothing but hope, a spoon, and a big heart. You may think small acts of kindness don't matter, but what if they're the very seeds that shape your destiny? The ending to Esther's story holds a lesson that could change the way you live forever. Oh. Long after the crowds had eaten and the sun had faded behind the buildings of Lagos, Esther would often return to her quiet office above the restaurant, the very place that bore her name in golden letters, Esther's Place, home of sweet meals. She would sit by the window, overlooking the glowing streetlights below, and think back to where it all began. A rusty wheelchair, a broken man, a single plate of beans and yam, and a decision made not for glory but from the heart. Now she had everything most people dreamed of: success, comfort, recognition. But none of it had ever been her goal. Her heart had never changed. It was never about fame. It was never about wealth. It was, and always would be, about kindness. One evening, after finishing a food charity run under the name Esther's Food Love, she walked back to the white van, exhausted but smiling. A little barefoot girl tugged gently at her dress and whispered, "Thank you, Auntie. My baby brother was crying. Now he's full." Esther knelt, brushed the child's cheek, and replied, "You're both important. Never forget that." That moment, small, quiet, sincere, was worth more than any trophy or bank balance. Her staff often wondered how she did it, how she found the time, the energy, the heart to keep going when she could easily rest in luxury. Some said she was an angel. Others called her the queen of the people. But Esther simply saw herself as a girl who had once needed help, and who now had the chance to offer it. In interviews, she was asked the same question over and over: "What made you help a beggar when you had so little?" Her answer was always the same: "Because it's not about how much you have. It's about what kind of heart you carry." And that was the truth of her story. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a real-life reminder that the value of a person is not measured in status, but in spirit. That the world doesn't need more riches. It needs more kindness. Kindness that doesn't ask for cameras. Kindness that doesn't wait for applause. Kindness that gives simply because it can. Esther's life became a living testament to that truth. From the patched dress girl who cooked beside a roadside tree, to the woman whose name was printed on banners, signs, and charity trucks, her journey was not one of luck, but of love. And while the world had seen her rise, what truly made her story unforgettable was that she never rose above others. She rose with them. She lifted others as she climbed. Now, every time she handed a plate of food to a hungry hand, she was passing along the same spirit that had once lifted her. And as people ate, smiled, and walked away with full stomachs and warm hearts, they didn't just receive food, they received hope. As she stood outside her restaurant one peaceful evening, looking up at the stars, she whispered, "Thank you, Chief George. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." But the real magic was this: someone, someday would look at her and say the same thing. Because when you give from a place of truth, when you give from a heart that expects nothing in return, the universe always finds a way to give it back. Bigger, better, and in the most unexpected ways. So the next time you're faced with a choice, to walk away or to reach out, remember Esther's story. Kindness is never wasted. Sometimes it just takes time to come full circle. The story of Esther is not only a poor girl's life-changing journey, but also a profound reminder of the power of sincere kindness. In a world where many people only help when there is a witness or benefit, Esther gave when no one saw, without expecting anything in return. And that opened the door to a magical destiny for her. The biggest lesson learned is, kindness, no matter how small, if it comes from a sincere heart, will never be in vain. Sometimes, an act of kindness can change a whole life, not only for the receiver, but also for the giver. For the elderly audience, this message is even more profound. When life has gone through many ups and downs, we understand that what remains in the end is not money or fame, but the love we have sown. Let's continue to live kindly, even silently, because that kindness can leave the most beautiful legacy for our children and grandchildren and for our own souls.